Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is the first video in a new series that I've decided to create on the importance of pronunciation. Yes, there's a cock crowing out there, and yes, it is the middle of the night. I don't know what the hell is going on in its head, but yes, it's quite aggravating. Anyway, it's not surprising that someone who has a channel on English pronunciation should be talking about the importance of pronunciation, but I do think that the importance of pronunciation is often downplayed by people who learn foreign languages and perhaps even people who teach foreign languages. And I think that that is a great shame, and today we're going to talk about why. I do think you should be very wary of taking the advice of people who tell you that pronunciation is not very important. There are some famous polyglots on YouTube who talk a lot of rubbish in this regard. And that is a pretty harsh criticism, but I do consider it to be rubbish. There are people who say that as long as your pronunciation is good enough for you to be understood, you're fine, don't worry about it. The rest of it is just cosmetic BS that's actually not very important. This is a very flawed point of view, and I do think that the people who give this sort of advice out are generally people who pronounce the foreign languages that they speak very badly, and who know deep down that they pronounce them very badly, and who do not want to admit that they have serious problems in this regard. This is precisely why they say, as long as you're understood, that's fine, you don't have to worry about the rest of it. Again, this is a very flawed point of view, and I want to talk about this a little bit. In this introductory video, what I want to do is point out that there's no such thing as being good enough to be understood in terms of pronunciation. I teach English and sometimes other languages, and I spend a lot of time thinking about the pronunciation of my students and trying to help them with their pronunciation. And I promise you that people can be speaking perfectly well, perfectly comprehensibly, very often, and suddenly they will say something weird that you just cannot understand. And the reason you cannot understand it is that their pronunciation is not good enough. So you don't suddenly pass some magic line in the sand beyond which your pronunciation is always good enough for you to be understood. There is no such line in the sand. All you can do, in principle, is keep refining and improving your pronunciation so that the frequency of people not understanding you because of your pronunciation gradually gets lower and lower. Let me give you a concrete example of what I'm talking about. One of the problems with people whose pronunciation is flawed is that they don't have any cover for their grammatical and lexical errors. What does that mean? It means that when we listen to people speaking our native language, and those people are not native speakers of that language, they will make mistakes. They will make grammatical mistakes, they will make lexical mistakes, and they will have errors of pronunciation. Sometimes these different sorts of error overlap with each other. Sometimes people will make a grammatical mistake and an error of pronunciation in the same word, or certainly in the same sentence. And as these errors come to overlap with each other, it comes to be harder and harder to understand what people are talking about. I had a Ukrainian student who was Russian speaking by background, and we were talking once about his job, and he said to me, "You know, Sam, I don't want to work like robot. I don't want to work like robot." Now, I don't know what that sounded like to you, but when I heard it, the first thing that came into my mind was, I don't want to work like Robert. But we hadn't been speaking about anyone called Robert. So that interpretation didn't make any sense. What he was actually trying to say, of course, was, I don't want to work like a robot. He was talking about quality of life. He didn't want to work all the time. He wanted to do things outside of work. He wanted quality of life. But like virtually every Russian or Ukrainian or perhaps a Slavic language speaker who learns English, he had a big problem with articles. I don't want to work like a robot. He dropped the article. So what he said was, I don't want to work like robot. But this vowel, we call it the goat vowel in phonetics, this O vowel in robot, is difficult for Russian speakers to pronounce. So robot can easily turn to robot, robot. So I don't want to work like robot is actually I don't want to work like a robot. But phonetically speaking, what he said was closest to I don't want to work like Robert, which is obviously something completely different. Now, if I make the same mistake that he made in my native British English accent, we get this: I don't want to work like robot. Any native speaker of English who hears that will understand that I'm saying the word robot. They might ask themselves why I've left out the article, but they will be able to identify the word robot, and that will give them the meaning of the sentence. If I say that sentence in his accent but put the article back in, I get this: I don't want to work like a robot. If I put the article in, that indicates that the word that follows the article is not robot, because it wouldn't make any sense to say I don't want to work like a robot under normal circumstances. When you have an error of pronunciation and a grammatical error right next to it, you create serious problems for yourself. It becomes very difficult for people to guess what you're saying when you make mistakes, yes? So if you have an error of pronunciation by itself, that's one thing. If you have a grammatical error by itself, that's one thing. But if you have two mistakes in rapid succession, you're going to create a lot of problems. And it is virtually always going to be the case that if you're speaking a foreign language, you will make grammatical mistakes and lexical mistakes. Your sentence structures will be wrong, or your sentence structures will be right, but you just happen to use the wrong word. As this happens, it comes to be harder and harder for people to guess what we're saying. But if you can pronounce the words you're using correctly, they can always be identified in principle as being the words that they are. So good pronunciation gives us a certain amount of insurance in this regard. It allows us to be understood, or to have a good chance of being understood, even when we're not putting our sentences together correctly. If you have grammatical errors and perhaps lexical errors and pronunciation errors all in the same sentence, then your chances of being understood plummet. Another example, I had a student and he was telling me that it had snowed the night before where he lived and that the snow was very deep. And he created a sentence to tell me about this, but he kind of butchered the sentence. His English is much better now, but it wasn't very good then. And he used a word that was either hip or heap, right? In this sentence, in this butchered sentence. And I wasn't sure which one it was, because both of those words tend to sound like heap, heap, when you listen to Russian speakers speaking English. So the snow was either up to his hip, or there was a big heap of snow outside his house. But because he garbled the grammar of the sentence, I actually couldn't tell what he was trying to say, or whether he was saying hip or heap, right? If you say, the snow was so thick, it came up to my hip, then we can guess that he's using the word hip, because it came up to my heap would be a very strange thing to say. If he had said, there was a huge heap of snow outside my house, then you think, okay, that's heap, because it doesn't make any sense to say there was a huge hip of snow outside my house. But because he garbled the grammar of the sentence, I had no way of distinguishing between hip and heap, right? So I, as a native speaker of English, can put on a weird accent. I can do some make-believe French accent, and I can speak like this, and I can do weird things that we do not do when we speak English. But because my sentence structure is perfect and my use of the lexicon is perfect, as you would expect, right, of someone from Britain, you can still understand what I'm saying. But if I were to put on that weird French accent and introduce errors, lexical errors, grammatical errors into what I say, then suddenly my strange fake French accent would start to create problems for you, because you would find it much more difficult to guess which words were coming. And you would come to be more reliant on the phonetic reality of what I was saying. Yeah? This is an example of why it's so important to try and develop good pronunciation in the foreign language that you're learning. But there are lots and lots of reasons to do this. There are lots and lots of reasons to do this. There are lots and lots of reasons to ignore the ignorant people who tell you that it's not that important, as long as you can be understood. There's no such thing as just being understood. There is no level at which you're just understood. That's a function of lots of other things, okay? So we're going to be talking about this in probably quite a large number of different videos that I'm going to make on this channel on precisely this topic. But that's just a starter. Think about what I said today. If you pronounce words well, that gives you an extra chance of being understood when you're making other mistakes, including other mistakes of pronunciation. You might make 2 or 3 mistakes of pronunciation, right, in the same sentence. But yes, good pronunciation is a type of insurance when you're speaking a foreign language. And for that reason, and for other reasons that we'll look at in the future, this is an extremely important subject. So that's it for today. There will be more videos in this series. I hope this was interesting and thought-provoking. And if you have any questions, then as usual, you can let me know down in the comments below. So that's it for today. Thanks very much, and ciao ciao, bye bye.